Welcome to Food for Thought, the place to explore, celebrate, and manifest a life motivated and defined by unconditional compassion and optimal wellness. Today's episode is animal-related Halloween films. Before we begin, my name is Colleen Patrick-Goudreau. You can find me at joyfulvegan.com and on social media. Thank you so much for subscribing to Food for Thought wherever you listen to podcasts, and thanks for sharing it. Thanks for leaving ratings and reviews. They really make a difference. And of course, thanks for supporting it. Food for Thought is a 100% listener-supported podcast. You will hear no sponsor breaks in this episode. Please join other listeners if you want to keep it ad-free in supporting this podcast and receiving podcast transcripts. There's other bonuses and perks depending on the level you choose. You can go to patreon.com/Colleen Patrick-Goudreau, and thank you so much for pledging monthly or pledging annually. You'll get your perks either way. Thank you so much in advance. As you know, as of this recording, I've been teaching live in real time online vegan cooking classes every week since COVID lockdown. And we just added more classes to the schedule, including a Thanksgiving class, a homemade holiday food gifts class, which is super fun. We're making caramel, people. We're making caramel. And a Christmas cookie class, a holiday cookie, whatever you want to call it. We're going to do lots of things, not just Christmas specific, but they're called Christmas cookies. We're doing Christmas cookies. Cutout cookies are going to make the best sugar cookies and royal icing you've ever had. And of course, we're making a Thanksgiving feast in the Thanksgiving class. Just go to joyfulvegan.com/classes, register for a live online cooking class. Or if you missed any of these past classes, you can enjoy any of the past classes in on-demand classes. So you basically get the recording and the recipes and some bonuses too. So check it out. If you are a supporter at $10 a month and above, you receive 10% off the live classes. So go to your email, check out your email and look for your discount code. But you can also write to me at support@joyfulvegan.com if you can't find it, and we'll hook you up. Hi, everybody. I hope you're doing well. Thank you, as always, to those who send me emails and letters. You really do make my day when you send me emails that you don't understand. Just remind me that there are people out there listening to my work and getting something out of it, because sometimes it can feel pretty lonely, and that I'm just kind of talking into the, just into the atmosphere. And so it really makes a difference to hear from you. I'm always touched that you take the time to share emails with me or comments on the website or on social media. I've been especially heartened by the responses to the most recent episode on ex-vegans, and I'm so thrilled. It's given you some food for thought. I'm beyond thrilled. That's why I do what I do. So please know that if you appreciated what I said in that podcast, you can find all of that and more in my newest book, In the Joyful Vegan. I'm very proud of this book. Unfortunately, it's really suffered because of COVID. I wasn't able to do all the live events I had scheduled or interviews I had scheduled. I was supposed to travel and do TV interviews, etc. So if you want to show your love and support for this book, for small business, for me, solo entrepreneur, then get yourself a copy from your local bookstore. You can order it from any bookstore or online bookstore. I'm just really bummed because I was really hoping that this book would get into the hands of millions of vegans. I think there's a conception that it's not written for vegans, that it's for struggling vegans or for people who wouldn't stop being. It's for everybody who's ever considered not eating animals. It tells the story of why we do eat animals and also care about them at the same time. It's for vegans to understand why people struggle and why they stop being vegan, but it's also to give you the language and the words and to mirror back for you what I have identified as the common experiences we all have as vegans, as people who live, kind of looking through this lens in a world where we're the minority. And so I really, 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 really hope that more vegans read this book. And thank you for doing so. COVID has affected many things indeed. It's about to affect our fall and winter holidays. It's about to affect Halloween for those of us in North America. It's going to affect our Thanksgiving. It's going to affect our Christmas, our Hanukkah. It's going to affect all of us. And I don't know what some communities are going to do. I know that a lot of communities are not going to have Halloween the way we normally would with parties and trick-or-treaters. We personally usually have a costume party / birthday party for David. His birthday's October 27th, but that ain't going to happen this year. We're probably going to have a couple friends over. We've been having regular dinners with friends outside. And again, we're very lucky we live in California because the weather is conducive to being outside well into December. I mean, our rains usually start around late November. And of course, it gets darker here earlier. But we have been able to have dinners outside with either 2 other people or 4 other people. That's the most we've done. And we do it very safely. And that will continue as long as we can be outside. But we usually have a party for Halloween, and we're not going to do it this year, obviously. We won't be putting any candy out for trick-or-treaters, although you've probably heard me talk about the fact that we live 100 feet up from the street. I'm not joking, we do. You have to walk up 100 steps, like 80 steps, but close to 100. Depends on what how large your footstep is. But we are very high up, and so we don't get as many trick-or-treaters as people who live at street level, but we do get some. And in the past, we've gone to our neighbor's house. One of our neighbors, Matt and Cindy, usually kind of have the party people collect at, and we all just kind of hang out and drink and have food, and trick-or-treaters pass us by and we give them treats, etc. And so even for those who stay in their house to greet trick-or-treaters, they usually wind up at Matt and Cindy's at some point. I'm not going to do that this year. So it's really a shame. Our street is a destination street for Halloween, which is kind of weird. I grew up in a neighborhood where you walked outside your door and you walked around your own neighborhood. A couple times maybe we went to, like, I remember going to our cousins once and we trick-or-treated in their neighborhood. But for the most part, we stayed in our neighborhood. There's this thing now, maybe tell me if this is something you have noticed in your world, in your life, where people drive to a like really prime trick-or-treater spot, neighborhood, street, whatever, and trick-or-treat there. It's really weird to me, but that's what this street is. We have been here 8 years, yeah, and it's a big deal. People drive from other neighborhoods in Oakland to come to this street. So it is a big deal on our street. There's a lot of houses decorated, which is lovely, but we're not going to have the same kind of Halloween. I know that most of our neighbors are not going to be putting their lights on. People are doing some clever things to give out candy. I'm not going to get into that here. I'm sure you can find that online. But for the most part, trick-or-treating is not happening this year. Will it happen again? Yes, it will, but not in 2020. But truly, whether or not we're in lockdown, whether or not we're managing a deadly pandemic or not, or if we're distanced from each other or not, this time of year is the perfect time to make some popcorn and cozy up in front of the screen to watch some good old-fashioned scary movies. I miss watching movies with friends. David and I watch a lot of movies. You're about to hear some of them. One of the things I'm thinking of doing, and I was talking to David about this the other day, is getting a big projector screen, on a stand, and getting a Wi-Fi enabled projector and being able to set up a big screen outside. So again, we can have friends distanced outside. We have some friends who do this in their yards, and we haven't done it yet. And it's ridiculous because it's like our movie watching habits are conducive to that. So I don't know what I'm waiting for. I just haven't looked into what it takes to get a projector and a screen, but that's one of the things we're thinking of doing. So that's an idea for y'all. You can take that. But it is the time to watch some scary movies. Now, a caveat about this, not only do I not watch slasher films or torture films or horrible blood and gore horror movies, I'm not going to talk about that today. So I don't want you to think that this is not an episode for you if you too don't watch those films. Okay, you should know me well enough to know that I'm going to be talking about kind of spooky movies, thriller movies. Yes, those that will fall into the horror genre, but these are not slasher films. But more importantly, because you also know me, I'm going to talk about animal-related Halloween films. Now, I've talked a lot about animals in film. You can go back and find many episodes on the Food for Thought podcast that talk about films. I even have a 3-part series on animals in films, like actual physical animals, real animals being used for the film industry. 3-part episode on that. So film is a huge part of my life. It has been most of my life. I thought I was going to get into film. I went to school after high school. Actually, I started doing TV production as a way to just kind of dip my toe into production, and decided that I wanted to watch films and talk about them and share them with people I love rather than make them. But so here I am, and I love that I can do that. And there's so many good films out there. So film is a huge part of my life. And while I wouldn't watch scary movies that depict violence against animals, or that that make animals the villain, even though there's a couple I'm going to talk about here, there are more than you think really good animal-related films worth mentioning that don't fall into the violence towards animals category that I think are perfect to recommend for Halloween. So I'm going to categorize them into a few subcategories, a few subgenres, give you a synopsis of each. And some of them I'll tell you what ages I think they might be appropriate for. But I think based on my description, if you're a parent and you have young kids or teenagers, you'll be able to gauge, if they're appropriate, and you can look it up as well, and you can see, kind of what the scary level is of these films. Now, as I said, you will not find any slasher films or torture films on my list. I can't watch movies that David can watch. Now, he doesn't watch those everybody has a different line. I don't have a judgment against people who watch, crazy, serious slasher films or torture films. David can watch some of them, but he'll get a lot of kind of interesting, he's watched a lot of the Italian scary films. There's a lot of, Italian horror films. Is it Argento, I think, is one of the filmmakers' names. And even when he watches ones that are pretty mild, like Babadook is one that he watched not that long ago, and he thinks I could probably handle it. I can barely be in the house if he is watching a horror film. And again, he doesn't do this very often because we mostly watch films together. But there are times when I'm out with, I used to be out with a friend, or if I'm doing something else, he will put in, a horror movie, and he'll have to put his headphones on because I cannot even listen to the soundscape. I can't. There's been times I've walked down on him watching a horror film, and just the image that is on the screen, it stays with me. I have a very visual memory and a very visual mind, so it just imprints on my brain, and I can't, I won't sleep. It's not good. Now, I don't want to make it sound like I only watch Walt Disney films. Like, I can and do watch films and TV series that contain violence. I watch a lot and love like murder mysteries and film noir, and I watch a lot of war films, suspense films, detective films, police procedurals, those kinds of films. I don't shy away from films that have violence or cruelty in them, whether it's toward humans or non-human animals as a theme for the film. But I don't like films with gratuitous violence. I don't watch films that have gratuitous violence. And there's a difference. I can watch films about violence or that contain violence because I think it's one way to understand who we are and how violence impacts us and others. But I have a line. And it's interesting because for years I talked about to David, like, there's some films I can watch that have violence in them and some I can't. And for a long time, I couldn't find the words to articulate what that line is. And then it came to me. I can watch or read, this also goes for novels, right? Or even nonfiction. I can watch darkness as long as there's light. But if there's a story, whether it's a book or a film, whatever, a play, where there's darkness and only darkness, I can't stomach it. If there's no redemption, it's just gratuitous violence. If there's not a way for the characters or the viewers to experience some kind of transcendence, I can't watch it. That's the difference for me. That's the line. I don't know if that resonates with you, but that's what it became for me. So as long as there's some kind of light, some kind of redemption at the end, then I can watch the darkness, because that light, that play between the two, I think characterizes or explains some of, or at least examines and asks questions about who we are as human beings. And I'm interested in that. But there are movies I won't watch and I can't watch. And I know me well enough to know I can kind of tell, you can kind of know. So I won't watch Seven or Candyman or Texas Chainsaw Massacre or Saw or Hostel. Or Halloween. Like I can't watch Halloween, right? They just wreck me. They wreck me. And I remember when I was in late middle school, I must have been about 11. A friend from school invited me to come over to her house for a birthday party. I remember this so vividly, like it was yesterday. And I was really excited to go to her house for this birthday party because I was new in the school and new in the town and making friends at that age. I was like 11, like I said, yeah, it's really hard. It's really hard. And so she told me it was a sleepover, optional, that if I wanted to sleep over, I could also sleep over. And I was so excited because I really wanted to be part of this group and I wanted to just make friends. And I really liked the girls that were going to be there. And then she told me that we were going to be watching a horror movie. And I wasn't thrilled. And I think she even said, I think I really, this is how vivid it is. I kind of remember her saying, we're barely going to be watching it. We're going to be playing and doing this and that. Don't worry, but we're going to watch a horror movie. That's on the docket. And it's funny. I was thinking this after I was going to bed last night. I was thinking that would have been I'm going to date myself. That would have been about 1981. I guess there were VHS tapes then? I know this sounds really silly. I can't remember. I guess by then we already had VHS, right? I'm sure we did. We did. I'm certain. I have to go look. Because to have a birthday party at that age, when I was young, when I was 10 or 11, where we're watching a movie, unless it was, one of these movies where we know it's going to be on at 8 o'clock on this certain channel, and that's what we did. I don't know. I don't think so, because she invited me back the next day. So I went. And I wasn't thrilled about the horror movie part. I was kind of bracing myself for it, but I went. And actually recently I looked up this particular friend. I have not spoken to her in decades because I lost touch with all these folks. I had moved to another town after this. And I looked her up recently. This was back in New Jersey, obviously. Looked her up. She lives 2 towns over from me now here in California. And I reached out to her on Facebook just to say hi. So that was kind of funny. So I had a good time. We all settled in, we started watching this movie, and it was horrible. It was awful. It was scary and brutal. And I remember it had Mary from Little House on the Prairie. I don't remember her name. I'll think of it. It was called Happy Birthday to Me. I don't know if you know this film. Slasher film, scary, just gory and bloody and scary and violent and cruel and awful. And so we were watching it and my stomach was in my throat. I was so scared. I had butterflies. It was terrible. I wanted to go home and see my mom. That's all I wanted, was to go home and see my mom. And so I can't remember if I made something up. I may have said I wasn't feeling well. I'm pretty sure that's what I did, because I was one of those kids who really tried to be brave when I was little and stay over at friends' houses. But in the end, I usually said I had a stomach ache and wanted to go home because I really missed my mom. So I'm sure one of her parents had to drive me home. That was probably annoying, but everyone was lovely about it. They drove me home. And I remember when I went home, and I have this really lovely memory of my mom just being really kind and really lovely, because I just wanted to crawl into bed with her. And I did. And I slept with her in her bed that night. And she knew how scared I was. And, she comforted me. And I remember telling her how scared I was, and it was awful. And then the next day, Mia called. This was my friend. Her name was Mia. And she called and she said that some of the girls were coming back that day to finish the movie, since some of us left before it ended. And did I want to come over? I actually asked my mom. I'm like, Mom, can I go? Because now it was daylight. Now it's light out. Now the memory of that horror was a little dissipated. And I said, Mom, I really want to go. Can I play? And she's like, no, absolutely no. You cannot go. You were horrified last night. And I'm like, yeah, okay, you're probably right. So that's what horror movies do to me. They just paralyze me. And I can't get those images out of my head. I still remember scenes from Happy Birthday to Me. And I remember the feeling I had. And that was, I'm going to date myself, 40 years ago. I can't believe that's the horror of it, that I can say I remember something 40 years ago. Oh, God. Okay. So anyway, moving on. I am not a fan of the horror movie genre in general, is what I'm trying to say. Ghost stories, yes. Thrillers, yes. Suspense films, yes. Mysteries, all fine. Horror, it's a pretty broad category. That's why we have subcategories in it, the slasher, the torture, what have you. Not a fan of those kinds of films at all. Now, everyone has a different comfort zone. You may love those films. No judgment at all. You can take more than I can. I just can't do it. Now, at the end of this episode, after I talk about the animal-related Halloween films, I'm going to talk about some of my favorite classic scary films, just, to kind of broaden things if you're interested. And those will fall into the scary movie genre. You're going to say, well, those are horror movies. Yeah, like I said, I can do, kind of the palatable horror films. I just can't do the darkness without light. There you have it. So really the theme, more than just calling this episode horror films, these are Halloween films. And I think that's nice and broad, so you can define that however you like. We're just going to start, though, in the context of animals and our treatment of them, which is a topic obviously I am most interested in. And you can go back and listen to non-Halloween related, animal related films in this podcast. You can find lots. And maybe someday I'll write that book that I really want to write about how animals are depicted on film and our relationship with them and our treatment of them on film. Now, we're going to do the first category, which is where animals themselves are the killers, animals themselves are the villain. You can find countless movies in this genre as, the animals are the demon protagonists stalking and killing humans. I am not going to go over too many of these. I'm going to go over the ones that I know and that I like and that I can recommend. But there are so many. Most of them are horrible. A lot of them are B movies. Nothing wrong with B movies. I watch B movies, but some of them are pretty bad. You're going to have to go assess for yourself which ones you want to watch. But some of them are pretty good. Some of these animals are the killer movie. And I guess I'd have to say that one of my guilty pleasures when it comes to one of these movies, when it comes to the movie that puts animals in the worst possible light and is probably one of the reasons this particular animal is still demonized, it's still one of the best movies ever made, and it's still a favorite of mine, and that's Jaws. Oh, now I'm talking about Jaws. I'm not talking about Jaws 2 or Jaws 3D or however many other sequels they did that messed up the, that's not the original Jaws. From 1975, directed by Steven Spielberg, starring Roy Scheider and Richard Dreyfuss and Robert Shaw. Putting aside the terrible PR it gave to sharks, it is so brilliantly written, brilliantly filmed, except for that one. Well, there's a scene where, because he had to work with a mechanical shark because they were like in the studio. Anyway, long story, kind of epic legend now at this point. But it's so beautifully acted. It holds up beautifully. We watched it recently and it holds up beautifully. In fact, if you want to watch a film that will resonate today in terms of, how shall I say this? In terms of how leaders should and do handle a major public threat and what they kowtow to, as opposed to doing what is right for the general public, watch this film through that lens, and you will be quite amazed and tickled, because it's so relevant in that sense. But in terms of just a good old scary, suspenseful film with a really good fear factor, it's fantastic. Best dialogue in this film. I could watch the scene where the three of them are on the boat telling stories, and when Robert Shaw's character tells the story of when he was in one of the boats during World War II that went down in the Pacific, and one by one men were being picked off by sharks because they were just bobbing in the water. The humans were waiting for a rescue boat, and they were there overnight. I think they were there a couple nights, and one by one men were being taken by sharks because that's what sharks do. And they are carnivores, and it's what's one of the most beautifully acted and incredible scenes. I could watch it every day. I should just watch that every day when I wake up, because it's just incredible. So watch the film, and we'll just we'll just put aside the fact that poor sharks get a really bad rap still from that film, but I can't do anything about that right now. I'm just telling you, if you want a good Halloween film, Jaws is it. Another one of those horror films where animals are malevolent and diabolically trying to kill people. It's still referenced today. It's so iconic. Despite the film being 57 years old, is The Birds. And it really is still mentioned. If there are several birds gathering in one place and appearing menacing, people reference The Birds. Hitchcock, right? Hitchcock's The Birds. And I'm pretty sure it still contributes to crows having a poor reputation. Ravens, crows. It was filmed not far from me, which is kind of makes it fun to watch because you can go up and see where it was filmed. It was set in Mendocino, but it was filmed in, I think it was Bodego Bay, which is not far from there. So it's pretty fun to go there. Basically, a wealthy San Francisco socialite pursues a potential boyfriend to a small Northern California town that slowly turns into this bizarre place where birds of all kinds are trying to kill people. They're attacking people. Anyway, they're mostly crows. And I don't know. It's one of those films that still, I think, again, it makes birds the kind of crazy, we're just out to kill humans, kind of monster film, but it holds up. It's a good classic Halloween film. Another one that semi fits into this category. Oh, Michiko has just pushed her way into the room. Did you hear the door open? Oh, it's still opening. Hi. I had the door closed to ward off any sound that would distract me from recording, but that backfired. Okay, moving on. So one film that semi fits into this category, so just don't focus on the category, focus on the film, is Pet Sematary, based on the Stephen King novel. Stephen King himself said that of all the horror novels he wrote, this one scared him the most. Now, I remember, I'd never read the book, but I do remember seeing the 1989 movie when I was young, and I definitely thought it was scary. Now, I probably wouldn't watch it again, mostly because there are other films I want to watch, but I could probably watch it again, even though I remember being pretty scared. Why don't you watch it? Tell me what you think. I think there's a new adaptation in 2019. Can't speak for it, not going to see it. If you see it, again, let me know what you think. I can make sure it's on the blog post. But the 1989 film seems to hold up well from what I can see. One of the things David and I use when we're choosing films and the way we have a lot of our films categorized is using IMDb. We do use IMDb a lot. We've used it since its inception. And you can always tell if a film, especially a film that was made 20 years ago, even 10, but mostly 20 years ago and beyond, if they have a rating, usually of 7 or higher is what we would say, then it's really held up. If a film, that's been out in the last few years has a rating of a 9, just give it time. Just give it some time in the oven and we'll see how it plays out. Because of course, if a film is very popular, it's going to get more ratings. But really the true test of a good rating on IMDb is a film that's been out for a little time. Now 6.6, which is what Pet Sematary from 1989, the rating is for that film. That's kind of right on the edge of probably a little bit of a B movie, not terrible, obviously not stellar, but still right there on the cusp where it's probably pretty watchable still. The impetus for the horror part of the story is the death of a beloved family cat, who is then resurrected, but under dark circumstances. I will leave the rest for you to watch, or perhaps you've read it. And while the cat isn't the main terror in the story, he's part of it and it starts with him. So I thought that fit well into this category. So that's the first subcategory, animals as villains. As I said, there are so many you can find, and I'm sure most of them are pretty bad. But Jaws, The Birds, Pet Sematary, I think they still hold up, especially Jaws, and I think they're perfect for Halloween. The next category is what goes around comes around. The human-animal violence parallels, right? So this category is about films and stories that make a connection between violence towards humans and violence towards animals. Silence of the Lambs is a good example of this. It's a very good movie. I think it's appropriate for Halloween, obviously. And while I don't want to give anything away, and I promise you don't see any animals in this film harmed at all. There is an allusion to animals being killed, an allusion, but not, you don't see it directly. And I think that's one of the things that makes a really good horror movie, just the mention of violence rather than the depiction of it, the explicit depiction of it. Our imaginations are capable of conjuring the absolute worst scenarios, so we don't have to have it shown to us. We can imagine it ourselves, right? Otherwise, it's a snuff film. Like where's the line? And I think the less you show, the more it just we are capable of conjuring the most horrific images in our own minds. So the animal related horror in this film is in the title itself, and I don't want to say anything because I don't want to ruin it, because it is a big part of the story. But I will recommend this film. It was probably just on the edge for me in terms of what I'm able to watch. I'm sure I'd be able to handle it today. But there are images that have lingered for me from this film. But it's a great cast, good directing, and it's a film I think that really holds up. The next film in this category of what goes around comes around is a film that I will never watch, but I have to talk about. And that is Texas Chainsaw Massacre. If you paid me $1 million, I would not watch this film. I have seen clips. That's enough for me. Those of you who can handle it, it's worth mentioning this film in this subcategory because this has been called really the quintessential vegetarian-related horror movie, if you will, if that makes sense. So the director and writer, Tobe Hooper, was aware that in making this film, he was creating a parallel between the torture and slaughter of animals and the torture and slaughter of human beings. This is straight from Wikipedia. I'm just going to read you a little bit here because it'll just distill it. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre has been described as the ultimate pro-vegetarian film due to its animal rights themes. In a video essay, film critic Rob Ager, A-G-E-R, describes the irony in humans being slaughtered for meat, putting humans in the position of being slaughtered like farmed animals. You can watch, that's the end of that. That's the end of the quote. You can watch Rob Ager's short 3-minute video essay on YouTube. Now, again, I won't watch it because it will show you scenes from the movie, but you can watch it on YouTube. And in this video essay, he argues that the movie shows the horrors of industrial agriculture by turning our world upside down, putting humans in the position of being slaughtered like farmed animals. The movie's killers used to run a slaughterhouse, and the means they used to slaughter their victims are the same as those used to slaughter cattle. So there's not a huge leap here, though I don't think a lot of critics have talked about it. I don't. I think it's kind of this niche of people who kind of look through this lens of animal rights and animal protection and vegetarianism and veganism who see it. But I don't know that Rob Ager is, but he sees it. And even the director, Tobe Hooper, said it a long time ago. He said it's a film about meat. And he said that he gave up meat while making the film. I'm sorry it didn't last, but he said, in a way, I thought the heart of the film was about meat. It's about the chain of life and killing sentient beings. He said in this quote, by the way, Tobe Hooper said that writer-director Guillermo del Toro, who we're going to talk about a little later on as well, became a vegetarian for a time after seeing the film. So we just need more films like this. We need more films to flood the consciousness of the public so that they see the connection and stay connected. Then you get them. So basically, we should hand a copy of The Joyful Vegan and the 30-Day Vegan Challenge outside of all of these films. I'm kind of not kidding. Because that is when you're so ripe after seeing a film like this, and then you need the thing that's just going to kind of turn it all over, right? So I won't see that film ever, but it has to be talked about in the context of today's topic. There's a new film in this franchise, because there's a whole franchise of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre films. I won't be seeing that either. I think it's coming out in 2021, but you might want to look out for it. I won't be seeing it. Okay, so moving on to a much lighter version, a much lighter pro-vegetarian Halloween film. This might surprise you because you may not have ever heard of it. It's called Wallace and Gromit and the Curse of the Were-Rabbit. Okay. It's a 2005 stop-motion clay animated film comedy, And if you don't know Wallace and Gromit, I'm here to tell you that you need to know Wallace and Gromit. They're these characters, these British characters, claymation characters. The whole Wallace and Gromit franchise was created by Nick Park of Aardman Animations. And you'll remember that name because I'm going to talk about it again. Aardman Animations. And the series, the whole Wallace and Gromit series consists of 4 short films and 1 feature-length film. But it's spawned like numerous spin-offs and TV adaptations. They are so delightful. They are so delightful. Now, even if you've never seen any of the TV adaptations or the short films or what have you, you might remember a major motion picture that actually did quite well in the United States. Apparently, it grossed over $200 million, became the highest grossing stop motion animated film in history. You ready for it? It was created by Aardman co-founder Peter Lord and Wallace and Gromit creator Nick Park, and that was Chicken Run. So Chicken Run started out as a spoof of the 1963 film The Great Escape, which I highly recommend. Love that film. Great cast. But you'll remember it as the ultimate animal liberation film. The plot centers on a band of chickens who see a rooster named Rocky as their only hope to escape the farm when their owners prepare to turn them into chicken pies. Frankly, you can consider this a Halloween movie for kids if you want, right? Because Chicken Run is kind of like what Texas Chainsaw Massacre would be for chickens if they didn't escape. So you can kind of consider Chicken Run a Halloween movie for kids. But then you're going to have a conversation with them about that, which you have to. But it's a lovely, adorable, it's an adorable film. It's an adorable film. But the Wallace and Gromit film that I want to recommend for Halloween is Wallace and Gromit and the Case of the Were-Rabbit, like werewolf, were-rabbit. I have a whole story about werewolf. Not relevant to today's conversation, but it's fascinating. It's fascinating. If you ever want to know, let me know. So it's Wallace and Gromit in the Case of the Were-Rabbit, and it was the second feature-length film by Aardman after Chicken Run. The film follows, of course, wonderful, eccentric, but really good-natured inventor Wallace, and Gromit, his intelligent dog who never talks. He's mute. He never speaks. In their latest adventure, as pest control agents, their company is called Anti-Pesto. Anti-Pesto, get it? Anti-Pesto. And they come to the rescue of a village plagued by rabbits before an annual vegetable competition. That's kind of a big thing in the UK. I don't know if that sounds as kind of cute and funny to those who don't get even just that, but like vegetable competition, it's a big thing in the UK. So that's the premise of the movie. It's the premise of the story. It's absolutely delightful. And I promise you it has this, in fact, Nick Park referred to the film, Nick Park and his co-director, Steve Box, referred to the film as the world's first vegetarian horror film, which obviously I think Texas Chainsaw Massacre probably has those honors, but this is the one I can recommend you watch because it's not Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So if you want to watch the first vegetarian horror film, watch Wallace and Gromit and the Case of the Were-Rabbit. Okay, so on this theme still about our violence towards animals and how that violence towards animals affects us both psychically and socially is explored in a number of other really good films for Halloween. I want to recommend one, which maybe you've seen. It's called 28 Days Later. I saw it many years ago. It's where humans get a taste of their own medicine after research chimpanzees infected with rage. That's what they're infected with. They're infected with rage. This is the experiment. They're released from a laboratory and they cause an outbreak of this deadly and contagious virus, rage, in this movie in 28 Days Later. If you like zombie kind of apocalyptic films, this is perfect for you. I really, really loved this film. I probably watch this again. It stars Killian Murphy and Brendan Gleeson. I love both of them as actors. Perfect for Halloween. For those of you who pay attention to what celebrities are vegetarian or vegan, Killian Murphy was for 15 years. He's the star of the popular TV series now. He's huge now because of Peaky Blinders. He was vegetarian for 15 years, but sadly, recently he said that he started eating meat to bulk up. It's sad because, of course, that's not what he needs to do. A trainer told him to do it, so he listened. And let's apply the principles I talked about in the last episode on ex-vegans and ex-vegan celebrities, shall we? But that is still a movie I would recommend, obviously, 28 Days Later. And then finally, I can't recommend it because I haven't seen it, but I thought I would just add one more to finish off with this parallel between human and non-human exploitation. And for those who can take more horror than I can, there's also the short film called The Herd, Herd. It's a short film. It was made in 2014, and it's about a number of kidnapped and trafficked women who find themselves imprisoned in a squalid medical facility, condemned to a life of enforced servitude at the whims of their captors for their milk. So, I think that's an interesting premise, obviously. Those are the kinds of, that's the stuff of horror, because of course it's just the stuff of horror for real. But when an audience can actually look at that and see it flipped on its head and realize, well, what's the difference? It's pretty powerful. I probably won't be watching it because of the images and just squalid medical facility and I can't do it. But if you can handle it, check it out. It's a short film. I think it's only 20 minutes long or something like that. 2014, The Herd. Okay, let's move on to some less gruesome films, even though Wallace and Gromit, not gruesome. And this is the category I'm calling Humans Are the Real Monsters. But I guess that's really the category for all horror films. Some of these teeter on science fiction or monster films, right? And I'm including them here because obviously, again, the criteria are what films are perfect for Halloween. So science fiction, kind of apocalyptic films. We're going to talk about some zombie films. And, we're going to talk about, we've got monster films. So we've got a pretty nice, I think, mix, if you will. So in this category, first and foremost, I will put King Kong. Now, this is an example where you can put this even in the first category of the animal is the one who's the villain. Yes, I mean, Cujo is another one that could have gone in that one. I remember watching Cujo when I was probably 16. And of course, you feel so much sympathy for the dog. So Cujo is a story about this Saint Bernard who, it's really rabies that makes him act the way he does. And it's actually really well done. I think it's pretty scary because he is pretty frightening, but, and I don't know, luckily I think St. Bernards didn't get a bad rap from the film. I think vicious dogs do. I mean, I think, right, that dogs are vicious is something that could come from that, but, it wasn't like a Doberman or a Rottweiler, and these are the kinds of animals I think get a really bad rap, pit bulls, obviously. But St. Bernards, I don't think it really affected that breed, but it's a good film. So I'm going to put Cujo also in that category of films depicting the animals as the menacing, the perpetrator. And King Kong, I guess you could say that. So, some of these categories are loose, but I don't know. I mean, I'm putting it in it's really because of what humans did to them that make them lash out and kill. And King Kong is that movie. Now, there are several versions of King Kong. I think, frankly, all three versions that are the most popular are worth watching. So pick. There's the 1933 version with Fay Wray. It's just a classic. Just watch it. Yes, there's some, women and this whole sexual, she's scantily clad and, really, offensive depiction of the natives on this island, yes. And watch the movie, draw your own conclusions. So that's the 1933 version. Then there's the 1976 version with Jeff Bridges and Jessica Lange. You could also say, again, this is the 70s. She's also scantily clad, and you could say that she's pretty well, sexually exploited. I love that film, though. I really love Jeff Bridges. I'll watch anything with Jeff Bridges. And I think Jessica Lange is just drips with sexuality, and that's partly what the film, that's part of the film. She's this actress, just like the main character in the 1933 film. And she is making this film where she's this scantily clad sexual character. And she plays that, obviously very well. But she's so fantastic. I just absolutely love her. And I I still think that movie holds up, and you feel so much sympathy for the gorilla, for King Kong throughout it, and at the very end especially. I still cry at the end of that King Kong. And then you have, it's imperfect, but it's still kind of enjoyable, and you definitely feel tons of sympathy for the gorilla, is Peter Jackson's film, 2005. Now, it's not a stretch to say that in the end, even though the giant gorilla is supposed to be the menace, it's only because he's misunderstood, mistreated, kidnapped, and exploited by humans that he behaves the way he does, i.e. kill people. Now, in both the 1976 and the 2005 versions, when there's any consciousness to his killing, other than just killing people on his rampage, he kills those who are most responsible for his really sad and pathetic plight. So, it's a vengeance film, you could say, as well. So it's a great movie for Halloween. It's a great classic to share, I think, with kids. I think it's a great conversation starter about animal exploitation. And I think all of them are worth kind of mentioning. So watch whichever version or versions you are interested in. Now, Frankenstein appears here also in this category in our monster Halloween films for obvious reasons. But what, you might be asking, does that have to do with animals? Well, I've got an entire episode on the classic novel by Mary Shelley. I do a whole episode on Frankenstein and its relationship to animals and compassion. So if you're interested in that, go check out that episode. And since it was made into several film versions, it belongs here in this episode as well. So you can find me talking about the novel itself in a separate episode. But here, when we talk about the film, when we're talking about animal-related Halloween films, we have to talk about Frankenstein. It was also made into several film versions, and I would say the best one, I think, is the Frank Whale 1931 adaptation with Boris Karloff playing the creature. Again, so sympathetic. And it belongs in this category because we've got the humans are really the worst monsters of all, right? In short, Victor Frankenstein, he's the scientist. His ambitions lead him to create, life itself, right? Playing God. And he regrets his decision as quickly as the creature he creates is animated, right? From a corpse. The creature escapes, seems to go on a murderous rampage, and just when we think we're reading a horror story about a terrifying monster on the loose, Mary Shelley flips the script and tells us the story from the creature's perspective. And that's when you really see that the animal-like creature, if you will, is really more compassionate than his human creator, right? So who really is the monster here? Who really is the human being? And that's really the gist of the story. But there are some specific things around animals in the film and in the story, but it's also carried through in the film, which is really lovely that Frank Whale kept it in, about his tenderness, about his compassion, and you'll see that in the film. So I do really recommend Frank Whale's adaptation from 1931. I don't think I mentioned this to you, but when we were in Switzerland, because, the story of Frankenstein, the inception was, oh gosh, who was it? It was Mary Shelley and Percy Shelley, and they were at Lord Byron's kind of summer estate. I think they were all like renting a house in Geneva at the lake in Switzerland, obviously, Geneva. And it was a dark and stormy night, and they decided to have a contest of creating a scary story. And so they all, in this dark, candlelit house on the lake during the storm, they each concocted a story. And Mary Shelley's story was Frankenstein. I mean, she started it there, but she obviously continued to work on it. And Percy, I think, was there to support her through it, but she wrote this story. And when we were in Switzerland, we were in Geneva, we went to see where this was, and we saw Lord Byron's, the house he rented. It's a private house now, so we couldn't go inside or go on the property, but from the street, it's right there on the street. And the actual lake house where Mary Shelley and where that contest took place was a little farther down the hill. We couldn't really see it exactly, but we could get a glimpse of it from the street. And it was pretty cool to just be there. I just love that. It was just really special to see exactly where they were and how you could imagine how creepy it would have been on the lake during a dark winter storm. So highly recommend Frankenstein, Frank Whale's 1931 adaptation. And of course, I have to give a nod to Mel Brooks' comedic take on the story in The Bride of Frankenstein. Now, Elephant Man is the next movie I would recommend. The main character is not an animal. Well, he's not a non-human animal. He's a human animal. And that's really, for me, the core of the story. He doesn't change into an animal. He isn't part elephant, but he is looked at as an animal, as an other, right? Because he's so different. And truly the carnival aspects where he's put on display, it's really conducive to Halloween, and it makes it, for me, the most harrowing aspect of the film. And it's a David Lynch film, perfect for Halloween. I think any David Lynch film is, including Mulholland Drive. You want a nice, creepy movie that just leaves you like, what? It's Mulholland Drive, right? So David Lynch anytime, or, Blue Velvet, any David Lynch film I think is perfect for Halloween, to be honest. So that to me is the most harrowing, is where he's put on as part of a freak show, like all the other animals who are put on as a freak show and kept in cages and just displayed to the public. So this is a movie I've loved for many years. I love it for its writing, for its acting, for its subject matter, for its stellar cast. It stars Anthony Hopkins, the incomparable John Hurt, Anne Bancroft, who's incredible, John Gielgud. It's just incredible. It's a fictionalized account of John Merrick, who was a disfigured man in London in the 19th century. He was a real person who, as you can imagine, had a pretty hard time of it. He was, as many disabled folks were, exhibited as part of a traveling show. Now, he voluntarily did this for some time because he made money and he knew there was really nowhere else for him. Everywhere else he worked, people were just freaked out by him because of his disfigurement. And so he, in some ways was an entrepreneur and kind of took care of himself by doing what was most, no doubt, humiliating, most definitely humiliating. But he was his own agent. He made that choice, but it's he doesn't do it his whole life. He stops at one point, and that's part of what you'll see in the story. And it's just such a beautiful film. Now, I know for me, when I first saw this movie, that was the image that stayed with me. It was him in the cage with the other animals in the cages. And of course, the whole concept of him being treated like an animal, being kept in a cage, fed slop, whose rights as an autonomous being were just generally ignored, as was the case for all the non-human animals. That was this very idea that he was treated like an animal is what the filmmakers capitalized on. So it has a really strong animal component to it. And of course, the animals themselves, as well as John Merrick, are all pretty much victimized by human cruelty, right? So again, who's the most human? If we measure compassion, our humanness by our compassion, who's the most human? The non-human animals, right? So definitely recommend Elephant Man. And then finally, in this category where humans are the real monsters and the animals have the final revenge, I have to recommend a 2014 movie, Hungarian director, Hungarian movie. I had an entire episode on this movie, but it's fitting for Halloween, so I'm bringing it up again here, is White God. Now, White God melds several genres. There's realism in the film. It's got a science fiction aspect to it. It's got this apocalyptic texture. At one point, it feels a little like a horror movie. It's got allegorical aspects to it. It's a revenge film. It's a coming-of-age film. It works on all of these levels. It's absolutely fantastic. Check out the entire episode about this film. It is that film that inspired the 3-part series about the history of and the ethics of using animals in film, because I got so many responses from you about this film and just think about it myself all the time. When is it appropriate to use animals in film? Is it ever appropriate? What's the treatment like of animals who are on sets? It's a 3-part series of animals in film, so you can go check those out if you're interested. Now, many of you already know my affection for Robert Bresson's film Au Hasard Balthazar, which is about a donkey named Balthazar and basically the parallels between the exploitation of this donkey and the exploitation of this female character named Marie. And on the surface, much of White God is kind of a catalog of abuses along the lines of those visited on by on Balthazar, this very saint-like donkey. In White Dog, Hagen is the dog. He's abandoned by his teenage owner's divorced father, who refuses to pay a tax recently imposed on the keepers of non-purebred, read mongrel dogs. He's abused in succession by a butcher, by a pair of dog catchers, a cartoonishly ghastly homeless man, a sadistic dog fighter, and even by the slightly more sympathetic owner of the city's animal shelter, but who it seems has long resigned herself to the fact that she can't save them all. So in the end, he is sold to an incredibly sadistic man who trains dogs for fighting and begins to abuse Hagen in order to make him mean enough to fight and essentially kill. Now, I really leave you to watch this film. No animals were harmed in the making of it. In fact, it's known for the fact that all the animals, all the dogs used, because there's this whole escape scene of all these dogs from the shelter and Hagen becomes their leader. All the dogs that were in the film, over 200, were all adopted. They were all from shelters, and they were all adopted afterwards. So it's a really brilliant film, and I really recommend it. I don't think you'll be disappointed, and I think it fits in our Halloween category, right? So again, this category of paralleling the exploitation of human animals and the exploitation of non-human animals, and that is culminated in a French horror film from 1960 called Eyes Without a Face. It's directed by Georges Franju. And in this movie, a surgeon preys on young women to harvest their skin in order to restore the disfigured face of his daughter, who I think it became disfigured from a car accident. So he kidnaps young women. They become his research subjects, just like the animals he keeps in his basement. And there are these animals kept in cages in his basement. These, I think they're mostly dogs. For research purposes, we never see the animals being hurt. So don't worry about that. It's 1960. But like White God, the animals have the final word. I'll let you watch it. It is such a fantastic film. It's perfect for Halloween. Eyes Without a Face from 1960. And just in terms of drawing more connections, incidentally, the Criterion Collection's DVD version of Eyes Without a Face also includes Franju's 1949 documentary it's a short, called Blood of the Beasts, Le Sang des Bêtes, and it depicts several Paris slaughterhouses, primarily those that killed horses. And it intercuts footage of animal slaughter with shots of children at play. And it's incredibly disturbing. It's an incredibly disturbing peek into real life and everyday horror. So rather than being simply a film depicting the realities of animal slaughter, Le Sang des Bêtes is a film about the ways in which humans can accept and institutionalize acts of almost surreal cruelty. One critic says, if it's appropriate for a man in a suit to pose next to the dismembered body of a horse and for workers to sing and whistle while slitting their throats, is it any surprise that humans can reach a point where they give each other shrunken heads as presents? So anyway, the point is, we desensitize ourselves. Read the first chapter of The Joyful Vegan if you want to know about willful blindness and desensitizing ourselves to violence. That's exactly what that is. And he depicts that beautifully in that short film. I have watched that film. As difficult as it is, I have watched that short film. Now, Le Sang des Bêtes would also prove to be the inspiration for another French film, which is also definitely a horror film, borders on the animal-related horror film theme, and I think it works. I haven't watched it. If you are interested, it's called Carne, from 1991, Gaspar Noé's Carne. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it in French, but Carne is how I would say it in Italian or Spanish. And it opens with the slaughtering of a horse, so again, I'm not interested. It actually, I think, is a real horse. I think they're in a slaughterhouse, so they film it. And it goes on to deal with the ways in which people are pushed into and then seek to justify acts of cruelty and violence. And so the main character is a French, obviously he's French. The main character is a butcher in a horse slaughterhouse. So I won't be watching it, but there you have it, another animal-related Halloween film. The next category, also appropriate for our film of animal-related Halloween films, is the thin line between human animals and non-human animals, like the transformation to animals from human. The theme of kind of blurring the lines between human and animal. where kind of animals are the embodiment on the other side of humans, right? So just that idea of transformation, this line between human and non-human animals. And of course, the first in this category, you know it, is The Fly. I've seen the original. Was that from the 30s, maybe 40s? I can't remember. But to this day, I still love David Cronenberg's version from 1986. It's so good. I haven't seen it in years, and I think I need to just revisit this for Halloween. Stars, of course, Jeff Goldblum, Gina Davis. It is so full of humanity and heart. I still cry at the end every time I've seen it. I mean, I haven't seen it in a while, but I probably have seen it 5 or 6 times. I used to watch it a lot when I was younger. Also more science fiction than horror, perfect for Halloween. There are some adult scenes, so I don't know if you're not comfortable with having your kids watch sex scenes. They're not terribly explicit, but they're sex scenes. Then maybe decide what age your kids you'd want them to see it. Maybe not under 15 if you're going to watch it with them. I don't know how that works. I don't have kids, but it's such a fantastic film. So The Fly is our first in that category of humans transforming into animals. And then the second, which I know sounds kind of weird, is Cat People. It's another movie where there's a fine line between animals and humans. I say it's weird suggestion just because it's kind of campy. There's 2 versions of it. There's a 1946 version by Jacques Tourneur, and his films is one of my favorite films. His film Out of the Past is one of my favorite film noir films, but he directed this movie, Cat People, in 1946, and it stars the incredible Simone Simon. Now, my husband doesn't talk about female actresses. He doesn't talk about females at all. I go gaga over, I will fall in love with, I don't know, it could be an actor. Most of them are dead, who I'm like, I love watching these, right, it's old films I'm watching, they're dead. But I kind of fall in love with them, and I don't make any mistake about it. I don't hide it. I don't do this with real people. I don't walk around the street with my husband and be like, he's really hot. That's not what I do. It's more of actors on screen. Or there's one person I do this for real, but I don't pass him in the street, and that's Nick Cave, because he knows I'm in love with Nick Cave. So he's a real person, but there's no threat. so anyway, but David just doesn't talk like that. He doesn't talk about women he finds attractive, whether they're on screen or in real life. He just doesn't. I've actually tried to get him. I'm like, don't you think she's gorgeous? Come on, she's beautiful. She's sexy. How can you not? And he's like, you're the only, he does that. He really does. It's ridiculous. I'm like, shut up. That's stupid. You have to be stop it. But he does. He's just like, nope, you're the only woman I see. Okay, whatever. So there are a couple actresses he does that with, where he finds them attractive and he'll say it. And I like it because I agree with them, because they are beautiful. And one of them is Simone Simon. I think she was French. I have to go back and look at the details of her life. I don't remember. But she is one of these actresses that just exudes. She's just sexy and adorable and just charismatic. You just love watching her every move, and he loves her. And she was in another movie that I would say is, I think, appropriate for Halloween. It's The Devil and Danielle Webster. If we can't talk about the devil and selling your soul to the devil at Halloween, when can we talk about it? So I would say this is another one I'd recommend. It's not animal related, but it's the story, The Devil and Danielle Webster is the story about a farmer who sells his soul to the devil so that he can be more successful. And then he hires a lawyer, Danielle Webster, to get him out of the contract when the devil comes to get her due. Simone Simon plays the devil. Yeah, she plays the devil. It's so good. It's 1941, The Devil and Danielle Webster. But she is the star of Cat People from 1946. And it's about an American man who marries a Serbian immigrant, and that's Simone Simon, who fears she will turn into the cat person of her homeland's fables if they're intimate together, so if they have sex. So there's a lot of underlying sexual innuendos in this film. And I say that only because I know people don't think that there was sex in film before 1980. I don't know. There's so much sexuality in films in the 30s and the 40s. Beyond, obviously, it's about humans. So you've got a lot of that in the 1946 film. And that's the premise, is that she's afraid if they have sex, that she's going to turn into one of these cat people. So because Tournear made this film with his cinematographer that he made other like black and white film noir films with, they just play with shadows and light. And it's just really beautifully shot. So it might be a little cheesy, campy for you. I think it holds up. I think it's really good. But if you want to watch a more contemporary version, which I think is actually inferior to the 1946 version. It is the version by Paul Schrader. That's Taxi Driver Paul Schrader from 1982. And that stars Natasha Kinski and Malcolm McDowell. It's not horrible. It's a little more sexually charged. It's the 80s after all. But it's watchable. I actually think if you want a little bit of an 80s kind of horror film that has an animal theme, I'd recommend Cat People, Natasha Kinski. She's actually also one of those women, I think, really just exudes, just so much sensuality, and it just kind of drips off the screen. And we'll talk about her father in a little bit as well. The final film, it's not the final film in this category. Two more in this category. One is Pan's Labyrinth, directed by Guillermo del Toro. When I saw this film, I think the fantasy aspects of the film are much better than the reality or the realistic aspects of the film, or the realism aspects, I should say, because I think those are really, unfortunately, very two-dimensional. It's set in 1944 in Spain during the Spanish Civil War. And of course, like the main general is like just quintessential evil. And I just think that does a disservice to evil humans if they're just kind of stock evil and not humans with these really dark tendencies. I think that's more interesting. But anyway, that's what I remember about the film. But the images, these characters he creates, these fantastic worlds he creates, no one is better at that than Guillermo del Toro. And so in this film, you've got lots of non-animal creatures, but you've also got animal-like creatures, including the faun, Faun, which is a goat-like character with horns and milky eyes. And he's the Pan in the title. The Spanish translation is really the labyrinth of the faun. So it's there. The animals are there. But it's just a fantastic film. And I mean, literally as the word fantasy, it's a fantastic film. And it's beautiful. I've never forgotten some of these images, really eerie, really perfect for Halloween. So check that out yourself. And then finally, in this category of transformation, so I'm talking about the line between humans and animals. That's why Pan's Labyrinth fits. But my final recommendation in this category is also from the 80s. The 1980s did a lot of really good films. The Thing. There's also an earlier version of The Thing. I've seen it. This is the one I'd recommend. I think this is definitely an example where the remake is much better than the original. And it's 1982. Kurt Russell's another actor. I'd watch anything he did. I absolutely love Kurt Russell. He's in it. Really good movie. And the whole movie isn't about a human animal transformation, but there is one scene, a really creepy scene, where you have this human animal transformation. So I'm including it here. I think it's really appropriate for Halloween, and it fits into our categories here for sure. Not just aliens, because there's an alien aspect, but there's an animal aspect as well. I love the thing that I think is the most interesting part, kind of like with Jaws, although this is more exaggerated, but the interactions between the characters, I think, is really interesting, especially the who can we really trust kind of aspect of this film. Really good. Recommend it. It's kind of got a cult following. Not everybody loves it. I think it's really good. Now, there are a lot of really awful human turn into animal horror movies that I am not going to recommend. You can find them yourself if you want to do a search, but those are the ones that I recommend for my animal themed Halloween movies. Now, that's all of my animal themed Halloween movies. Okay, Charlie just jumped up when I said that. Do you know I'm talking about animals? Cat people. Is that why you jumped up? So you can end here if that's all you came for. But I'm going to add as a bonus just a few more movies that are not animal related, but that are some of my favorite good old-fashioned scary movies perfect for Halloween. So I wonder if some of them have animal. I'm always looking through that lens. There's probably some animal related aspects possibly in some of these films, but that's not the reason I'm giving this list. I'm giving this list because I think because these are my go-to standard, like if you want scary Halloween movies, this is what I gravitate to. Now, The Exorcist, I'm just going to name because it is one of these films that should not just be called a great horror film. It's a good film. I shouldn't say great film. I'm going to say it's a good film. We watched it recently, and it still scared the bejesus out of me. As enigmatic as some scenes are, and as dated as some scenes are, it's still it holds up. So The Exorcist would be one. Misery is one of those films I have not seen in years, and I kind of feel like I should watch. I don't think David's ever seen it, but it is a perfect example of the theme. Humans are the greatest monsters of them all, for sure. Again, iconic scenes that are part of our culture now, that we'll never, ever forget. I can't listen to, what's the song she plays? Oh my God, what is it? It's one of the songs I actually learned. It's Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. It's one of the songs I learned on the piano. I can't hear that song now. I can't hear that Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata without thinking of the scene from that movie. So iconic. I'm going to put it in a Halloween theme. And then there's some vampire films I'm going to recommend. If you like vampire films, I'm going to recommend 3 amazing vampire films. Really, the first one is one of the ones that started the whole genre. So if you want to see a film that started the whole vampire genre of films, of course, there was Bram Stoker's novel from 1897, Dracula, which is worth reading if you want to read a nice scary story around this time. I think it's definitely moody and eerie and perfect for this time of year. I would recommend first and foremost Vampire by Danish director Carl Theodor Dreyer. It's from 1932. It's absolutely gorgeous. Everything Dreyer made was absolutely gorgeous. So if you want to go on a director theme, watch anything by Dreyer. He was amazing. This film in particular, it's his first sound film. I'm going to read you what someone from Criterion Collection said, because I think he just nails it. With Vampire, Danish filmmaker Carl Theodor Dreyer channeled his genius for creating mesmerizing atmosphere and austere, unsettling imagery into the horror genre. The result, a chilling film about a student of the occult who encounters supernatural haunts and local evildoers in a village outside of Paris, is nearly unclassifiable. A host of stunning camera and editing tricks and densely layered sounds create a mood of dreamlike terror. With its roiling fogs, ominous scythes, and foreboding echoes, Vampire is one of cinema's great nightmares. So if you're a fan of the vampire genre, you have Vampire to thank. It was only the 3rd major film and the 2nd talkie to feature what would become the well-known vampire of popular culture. And one of the others was Todd Browning's 1931 Dracula starring Bela Lugosi. Next is Nosferatu. F.W. Murnau, 1922. Also adapted from Bram Stoker's 1897 novel Dracula. Murnau was a German director. He came to the United States like so many German directors who brought their expressionist style with them. Love German expressionist film. If you're interested in that style, you will love Murnau's 1922 Nosferatu. And then I am not opposed to remakes because some of them are not bad, and some of them are even better than the original. Nosferatu the Vampire, not better than the original, I wouldn't say, but it is an homage to the original. It's by Werner Herzog. He made this in 1979. Klaus Kinski is the star. I think it was the 2nd movie he did with Klaus Kinski, and he would go on to make many films with Klaus Kinski. Klaus Kinski was Natasha Kinski's father, and Isabella Gianni is also, and she was she's just gorgeous. She's just beautiful. She stars in this with him. It's set primarily in 19th century Wismar, Germany and Transylvania. Highly recommend it. Very stylistic, an homage to Murnau's Nosferatu. And then finally, I'm going to mention a camp vampire film. I'm sure you have your own. Mine was Fright Night from the 1980s. I watched that film so many times when I was a teenager. Totally campy and wonderful, and I bet I would still love it to this day. So that's my favorite vampire film. Well, campy vampire film, because my favorites are Nosferatu, Nosferatu the Vampire, and Vampire. Another kind of go-to scary film for me is Deliverance. We also watched that recently. Obviously, if you're if you're in my age, the basic kid playing a banjo, kind of weird, and something unsavory happens involving a guy squealing like a pig. Like it's still really gripping. It's still really fantastic. Jon Voight is another actor I'd watch anything with. Burt Reynolds is fantastic. Ned Beatty, fantastic. Highly recommend it. We watched it recently. I had trouble sleeping that night. Yeah, it still holds up. It's amazing. Another one of my favorite directors is Henri-Georges Clouzot. And his movies from the 50s, they're just absolutely gorgeous. Les Corbeaux is one, which means the raven, I think, but it has nothing to do with birds. And Wages of Fear, OMG. But his quintessential thriller, which you may have heard of, I think there was also a remake. Don't even bother. Watch the 1955 Diabolique. It's like old school fear, one very big shock out of a twisty menage murder. And there's the headmistress, a wife and his mistress. Watch it. It's so good. There's the possibility of some supernatural. It's perfect for Halloween. Honestly, it's fantastic. Diabolique means the devils. Another one I'd recommend for Halloween, not animal related, but wow, is Let the Right One In. I actually should include this, I guess kind of in our vampire, but not. I guess it's a vampire movie. I should have included this in our vampire category. Swedish vampire movie called Let the Right One In. And like in our movies where we're sympathizing with the killer, i.e. the animal, in this case, we sympathize with the main character who's a little girl watch it. I don't want to say anything else. It's incredible. Let the Right One In. And what else do I want to say? Shining. It's a classic, still a classic Halloween film. The Haunting is a 1963 film. I think people are now aware of The Haunting because The Haunting of Hill House, which is a short story by Shirley Jackson. I love Shirley Jackson's, actually it was a novel. I love her short stories. I love her novels. It was adapted into a film in 1963. It's a British film starring Julie Harris and Claire Bloom. Russ Tamblyn, if you know Russ Tamblyn, who's fantastic. If you know Seven Brides of Seven Brothers and West Side Story, he was an amazing acrobatic dancer. Anyway, he's in it. And it's about a small group of people invited by a paranormal investigator to investigate a purportedly haunted house. I think it's been made into a series. I haven't watched the series. Maybe it's good. I don't know. Let me know. But The Haunting, the 1963 film, love it. Another campy film I want to recommend is The Bad Seed. It was also remade in the 80s, I think, with like Drew Barrymore. Don't bother. Watch the 1956 psychological horror thriller film. It's melodramatic. You will never hear the word Rhoda again without saying Rhoda, like the way the mom says. You have to watch this film. It's totally campy. It's so worth it. It's so fantastic. Settle in for camp, but it's just worth it. Okay, The Bad Seed. Definitely a haunting movie that I recommend if you like old movies is Carnival of Souls. I think it's in the 50s. Gosh, I have to go back and look. I don't have that date here. The Carnival of Souls, there's a church organist named Mary who is a car crash survivor, and she moves to this new town and she finds herself drawn to this carnival, this old abandoned carnival, and she encounters some very spooky things at night. It is so spooky and so well done. Iconic images from this film David and I still talk about. We saw it about 15 years ago. And then finally, in my general category of horror films I recommend is I say horror films, Halloween appropriate films is The Seventh Seal. This is an homage to Max von Sydow. Of course, it's an homage to Bergman. And of course, I love Bergman films, all of his films. But this one is an homage to Max von Sydow, who actually was also in The Exorcist. He died this year. I think he was like 95 or something, 91. He died this year, 2020, on my birthday, on March 8th. And of course, it's this classic, incredible. 1957, Swedish historical fantasy film. It's set in Sweden during the Black Death. So, seems kind of appropriate to watch this now. Tells the story of the journey of a medieval knight, Max von Sydow, and a game of chess he plays with the personification of death, who has come to take his life. So if you can't have a movie about death personified in a podcast about Halloween appropriate movies, I don't know what else to say. And then finally, I really do want to give some final favorites in its own category, because Japanese ghost films, Japanese horror films just really deserve their own category. Nobody does ghost films like the Japanese, honestly. They're just so moody and ethereal and scary. Now, Ring or Ringu was one that made its way to the West. People really know that movie, but then there was a Ring, an American version, a remake. Watch the Japanese version. Ringu, watch the Japanese version. Just so incredible. Now, some of you may have seen some Japanese horror films. It's kind of its own genre, Japanese horror films. I would say Japanese ghost films is also its own category, but no one does the genre better than the Japanese. One of the most haunting Japanese, well, I'll call it a horror film, is from 1926. It's a silent film. It's called A Page of Madness. It's kind of in the German expressionist. It's kind of got that feel like The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, like goes to Japan and meets some German expressionism. Like it's like really like art house, weird, trippy, kind of psychedelic, psychopathic. It's wild. And David and I saw this as part of the San Francisco Silent Film Festival in 2002 on April 23rd. And I remember that because it's the only time there was a live music orchestrated score by Superchunk live in San Francisco at the Castro Theater in San Francisco on April 23rd, 2002. And it was one of the most memorable film experiences of my life. It was incredible. Now you can see the film on YouTube. I looked it up for you because I didn't want to recommend a film you wouldn't be able to find. And by the way, most of these films you can find either on Amazon Prime or Hulu or YouTube or Netflix or wherever you find your films. So you can, if you join Criterion Collection's film channel, there's so many options these days, which is really nice. But this one you can see on YouTube, A Page of Madness, and it's just creepy. Basically, it's about a janitor who works at a women's sanatorium. She's in a house for the mentally ill, in order to keep an eye on his wife who was committed there. And as his environment causes him to slowly lose grip on reality, he fantasizes about a better life for him and his wife that will never come. The final 10 minutes, which sees the janitor increasingly desperate to find any semblance of happiness and normalcy in a world that doesn't allow that, is especially creepy, thanks to the use of some chilling masks. I'll say no more. I can deal with some masks, but I will tell you one of the things that I cannot deal with, and I'll see if you can relate to this. I can't do clowns, I can't do dolls, and I can't do puppets. Masks, fine line. But there are some pretty creepy masks in A Page of Madness. Highly recommend it. The second Japanese ghost film I will recommend is by Kaneto Shindo. It's 1964, Onibaba. Oh my gosh. David and I will talk about the opening of Onibaba once a week. Once a week, we'll just talk about the opening of this film. So incredible. It's considered one of Shindo's horror masterpieces. It's filmed in this incredible black and white. It takes place in the midst of a civil war in 14th century Japan. And a mother and daughter-in-law are forced to survive by robbing and killing samurai soldiers who cross their paths. I'll say no more. Another film also by Shindo, Kaneto Shindo, is a 1968 film called Koroneko. It means the black cat. It has nothing to do with cats. It highlights female characters who are forced to survive in an outside world marked by misogyny and male violence. So if you want to watch a good like feminist horror film, this is it. This is it. It's surreal. It's moody. It tells the story of two women who were brutally murdered by a group of samurai. It's poetic. It's atmospheric. It's set in a war-torn medieval Japan where a malevolent spirit has been ripping out the throats of itinerant samurai. What? It's so, yeah, it's so good. And again, if you want like a feminist angle, you got it. Special effects. It's a ghost. It's like a perfect ghost film. Kuroneko or the Black Cat. Kwaidan, you can't see Japanese films without seeing Kwaidan. Like you have to see Kwaidan. It won the Special Jury Prize at the 1965 Cannes Film Festival. It was Oscar nominated for the Best Foreign Language Film. 1965, Kwaidan, which is a transliteration of Kaidan, which translates into English as ghost stories. You have to see. If there is any film on this whole list, if you wanted to see like quintessential ghost stories, watch Kwaidan. It's by Kobayashi. You have heard me talk about Kobayashi. He is one of my favorite movie directors. He directed The Human Condition. He is an incredible director. And there are 4 tales in this whole film inspired by Japanese folklore. Kwaidan, Kwaidan. Another Japanese film, kind of less ghost, more psychological horror, is called The Face of Another, 1966, based on the novel by Kobo Abe. And it stars my favorite Japanese actor, Tatsuya Nakadai. He's one of the ones that David knows I'm in love with, even though he is 84 years old. Is he? He's probably 85 now. He was born the same year as my mom. I think he's still alive. My mom's not, but he's wonderful. And he just made so many incredible quintessential Japanese films. And he did a few for Kobayashi. He stars in The Human Condition. So watch The Human Condition, watch The Face of Another, watch Kwaidan, which is by Kobayashi. The Face of Another is about this, let's see, it's about a man who receives a face mask from a renowned plastic surgeon, but his new facial identity takes a toll on his mental health. So he was in an accident. And he was like, there was like an industrial accident. So he needs a new face. So he gets this reconstruction with this mask. Anyway, it is, it's really surreal and it's really good. And it kind of has, it actually has kind of a feel of like Frankenstein and also Eyes Without a Face. So you can watch all of those together as part of its own theme. Another final kind of erotic horror that I'm going to end with is 1964 film called The Woman in the Dunes. It's also based on a novel by Kobo Abe, and it's about an entomologist who visits sand dunes for research, and locals offer him sleeping quarters at the bottom of a sand pit, and in the pit, he meets a widow who lives there. When he wakes up in the morning, the ladder he used to enter the pit is gone. And he's been condemned by the locals to help the widow perpetually dig sand out of the pit she calls home. It's existential, surreal, philosophical, and absolutely beautiful. And I highly recommend it. And I think it's appropriate for Halloween. 1964, The Woman in the Dunes. Creepy. I could make so many more suggestions. I could suggest thrillers and suspense films and German expressionist films. I was going to do films and TV series that are appropriate for Halloween. I can't. I'm done. I've got nothing else to say. I have more to say, but I've been doing this for 90 minutes and I have to stop. Now, I do not just associate Halloween with horror movies at all. If you look at our house decorations, like our yard decorations compared with our neighbors, our decorations are pumpkins and scarecrows. I have like a headless scarecrow with holding his pumpkin as his head because it reminds me of like the really scary kind of like Washington Irving films. I mean, novels. See, I'm tired. From like New England, 19th century, like that kind of stuff. That's what I love, is like the harvest aspect of this year and scarecrows and that kind of thing. Ghost stories. And that's what this holiday is about, right? It was the harvest. It was, mean, it goes back to Samhain, which is a holiday of the ancient Celts, and it really had to do with harvest. Now, those are the roots of our modern day Halloween and the Catholic holiday, All Souls Day, right? The festival of Samhain is a celebration of the end of the harvest, and the term Halloween is a word that's been shortened from All Hallow Even. It's the evening before All Hallows Day, All Saints Day. Hallow means holy, so it's the evening before All Saints Day. Many European cultural traditions hold that Halloween is one of the times of the year when spirits can make contact with the physical world, and this is seen in the Mexican holiday, the Day of the Dead, or Dia de los Muertos, whose emphasis is on honoring the lives of those who died and celebrating the continuation of life. So this holiday is about death, but leave it to the humans to make it about violence in these films. So that's for my line. Like, I don't mind kind of going there and seventh seal, death, ghosts, the other side, kind of that kind of thing. I think that's super appropriate. And of course, I like thrillers, and I love the idea of the vampire. Like, that's super fun as well. But I just can't go too dark. We all have our lines. But I hope this was fun for you, and I hope you enjoyed looking through the lens of animal-related themes. I hope you pass this on to others. I hope you watch these films beyond Halloween. I just thought this was a fun time of year to produce this episode, and I really want to hear what you think. I'd love to have a film club. We can do something like that. We can just start by discussing any of these films on the podcast episodes page on joyfulvegan.com. So go over there, and if you want to start discussing the films, let's have at it. I mean, I'm super, super excited about that. We could have an animal-related film club. It's something I've been talking about for a long time, but that's all I have right now. I think that's plenty to hold you for quite some time. Do share the blog post when I get that up. When I say blog post, I mean it's going to be the episodes post up on the website. That's going to take me a little longer to get up. But in the meantime, I hope you enjoyed this. Have a wonderful Halloween. Have a safe holiday. And let me know what you think about this episode. I'm super excited to hear from you. For the animals, this is Colleen Patrick-Goudreau. Thanks for listening. And Charlie thanks you too. I don't know if you can hear Charlie, but he's purring.